In March of 2017, a 37-year-old veteran climber named Evan Mercer decided to attempt the frozen north face of Mount Argent in the Colorado Rockies alone. Before he left, he told his partner, Maya Collins, that he'd be back in 4 days. He sounded sure of it, the way seasoned climbers do when they've rehearsed a route in their head so many times. It feels like a memory. Just over 3 months later, a search drone captured an image that stayed with everyone who saw it. A human figure in torn, sun-bleached layers, slumped on a narrow shelf of rock roughly 800 feet above the valley floor. Not fallen, not buried. Just there, visible and yet unreachable from the ground, as if the mountain had placed him on display and dared the world to do something about it. The story of Evan Mercer isn't one of villains or conspiracies. It's the kind of wilderness tragedy that begins with confidence and ends with silence, where the only enemy is distance, cold, and the thin margin that separates experienced from stranded. Arrival. On March 12, 2017, Evan drove into Stonehaven, a small high-country town tucked into the folds of the southern Rockies. Stonehaven lived off seasons, summer hikers, winter skiers, and, always, climbers. To people who knew the region, it wasn't famous the way Aspen was famous. It was practical. A place you passed through because it sat close to routes that demanded more than enthusiasm. Evan was exactly the kind of person who belonged there. He'd spent more than a decade in vertical places: granite, limestone, ice, mixed terrain on 3 continents. He'd climbed in Patagonia, chased long lines in the Cascades, and cut his teeth on big walls back home in the States. Friends described him as careful to the point of ritual. He checked knots twice, kept clean notes, and treated luck like something you never tempted. And yet Mount Argent had become his obsession. He'd tried the mountain's north face twice before. Both attempts ended the same way: weather closing the window, wind turning the wall into a refrigerator door, forcing retreat. The route was notorious for its trap sections that were too steep to rest, too exposed to take time, too cold for mistakes. Evan used to say it wasn't the height that made Argent dangerous. It was how quickly it could turn a small problem into a permanent one. This time, a short forecast window promised clear, bitter days cold, enough to keep the ice bonded, calm enough to move. Evan believed that was all he needed. He checked into a family-run lodge called the Timberline Hearth, a modest place at the edge of town where climbers often spent one last night before the wilderness swallowed cell service and comfort. The owner, Lydia Harrow, remembered him later with odd clarity. Not because he was loud or dramatic, he wasn't, but because he carried himself like someone already halfway up the mountain. He hauled in 2 heavy duffels, one stuffed with technical gear, the other packed with fuel, food, and emergency supplies. He asked Lydia about the access road, the trailhead, and whether the ranger station had anyone on duty. "The road's fine," she told him, "but the temps up high are dropping under 0 at night." Evan gave a small nod that said he'd heard worse warnings. "I've slept colder," he replied, and smiled like it was a private joke. That evening he called Maya in Fort Collins, where they lived together in a small apartment, crowded with climbing hardware, guidebooks, and half-finished gear repairs. Phone records later showed the call lasted a little over 10 minutes. Maya told investigators Evan sounded steady, focused, even cheerful in that quiet way he got when he was about to do something hard. He explained his plan. Start early, approach the base, bivvy, then move into the technical climbing the next day. If things went well, he'd hit the summit line by the 3rd day. He promised to send a check-in on his satellite messenger once he reached the ridge. Maya asked him to be careful. He laughed softly and said, "I always am." Those were the last words she heard from him. The approach. Before dawn, on March 13th, Evan left the Timberline Hearth. Lydia watched his headlights sweep across the gravel lot as he pulled away. The sky was still black, the kind of cold dark that makes the world feel brittle. Frost glazed the windshield of his truck, and his breath must have hung in the cab like smoke. He drove north toward the access road that led to Mount Argent's trailhead. His vehicle, an older white pickup, was later found, parked where he'd left it, locked and undisturbed. On the dashboard, searchers discovered a neatly written note: route plan, rough timeline, and Maya's contact information. It was the kind of thing experienced climbers do without thinking, a quiet acknowledgement of risk without any theatrics. Evan began hiking around sunrise. The approach wound through dense pine forest, climbing steadily until the trees thinned and the world opened into a boulder-strewn basin leading toward the mountain's darker cliffs. The north face of Mount Argent rose ahead like a shadow made of stone and ice more wall than slope, split by cracks, chimneys, and bands of frozen runoff. According to his plan, Evan intended to reach a base camp area by early afternoon, rest, then start the technical ascent the next morning. That first day appeared to go as predicted. Clear sky, sharp air, light winds. No storms, no sudden shifts. It was the kind of perfect day that convinces you the mountains are cooperating. And then, nothing. Silence. Evan didn't send a message on March 14th. He didn't send one on March 15th either. At first, Maya tried to stay calm. Backcountry communication is unreliable even with the best devices, and Evan had disappeared into rugged terrain where cell reception wasn't a real option. But by the evening of March 15th, unease hardened into fear. She checked the satellite messenger account again and again. No updates, no check-in, no all good, nothing to anchor her mind. On the morning of March 16th, she called the Stonehaven Sheriff's Department to report Evan missing. The deputy who took the call, Miles Hart, asked questions in the careful, measured tone of someone trying to balance realism and empathy. Was Evan experienced? Did he have proper equipment? Did he have a plan? Miles noted that climbers sometimes lost communication for longer than expected. Still, he agreed to send a ranger to check the trailhead. By midday, the ranger confirmed Evan's truck was still there, untouched. That was enough. Sheriff Grant Holloway, a veteran officer who knew what the mountains did to the unprepared, and sometimes, to the prepared, authorized a preliminary search. He understood Mount Argent's north face in a way maps couldn't capture. It was a place where rock could peel without warning, and cold could turn a minor delay into a fatal one. When Holloway thought about a solo climber on that wall, he didn't imagine a simple rescue. He imagined puzzles made of ice. On March 17th, a small team of volunteers and county search and rescue personnel hiked toward the base of the north face. They found signs that someone had been there recently. A flattened patch of snow where a tent might have stood, scuffs in the ice near an approach gully, and a single empty fuel canister half buried near the rocks. The canister matched what Evan had purchased in town. It confirmed he'd reached the base. But beyond that, the trail of certainty vanished. From below, the north face looked like a grim mural dark stone, pale ice, deep seams of shadow. The team scanned with binoculars, searching for unnatural color, movement, gear, anything. There was nothing. If Evan was up there, he was invisible from the valley. Over the next week, the search expanded. More volunteers arrived, including members of a non-profit high-altitude rescue organization. Some of them had known Evan personally. They'd shared anchor stations with him, trusted his judgment, laughed with him in storms and exhaustion. Now they moved across the mountain looking for a friend who had stopped answering. Teams divided responsibilities. Lower slopes, gullies, possible descent routes, and sections of the wall that could be reached safely. A few attempted to climb partway up to gain sight lines, but the mountain punished curiosity. The weather began to shift. Clouds thickened, wind rose, snow hissed across the rock like sand. At night, The temperature dropped deep below freezing. By March 23rd, after days of effort, the search was suspended due to hazardous conditions. Sheriff Holloway addressed the public briefly at a small community building, standing beside a large map with the north face marked in red pen. His expression carried the tired seriousness of someone who had seen too many outcomes. He promised the search wasn't over, only paused until conditions improved. Maya sat in the back, hands clenched, staring at the map as if the lines could speak. The weeks after spring arrived the way it often does in the Rockies, slowly in the valleys, stubbornly absent up high. Snow melted from streets and rooftops, but Mount Argent stayed locked in winter. Search teams returned twice in April, hoping thaw and longer daylight would offer new clues. They found nothing new. No clothing. No abandoned pack. No bright scrap of fabric snagged on rock. It was as if Evan had been absorbed into the mountain's face. Speculation spread, the way it always does when there's an empty space the mind can't tolerate. Some believed he'd fallen into a hidden chute and been buried under snow. Others suggested he might have topped out and descended another route, injured or lost on the way down. A few whispered about deliberate disappearance, but anyone who truly knew Evan dismissed that immediately. He wasn't running from his life. If anything, he was running toward something. The clean focus he found on steep stone, the rare quiet that came when everything else fell away. As the weeks dragged on, media attention softened. Another story replaced his. Then another. Town life continued. Coffee in the mornings, hikers on weekends, snowmelt in the gutters. Maya did not continue. She stayed in Stonehaven, renting a small room above a shop on the main street. She printed flyers and posted them at trailheads and gas stations. She bought cheap binoculars and walked paths she never would have chosen for herself, searching cliff lines and treetops as if an answer might be waiting in plain sight. Locals began to recognize her, the woman in the gray jacket who always looked uphill. In late May, a hiker reported seeing a flash of color on the north face, high above. Deputies sent a team to investigate. The color was old rope sun-rotted, frayed left by climbers years earlier. It had nothing to do with Evan. Still, Maya clung to it as proof that the wall could hold traces, that the mountain didn't erase everything immediately. By early June, official efforts slowed to a near stop. The case remained open, but the kind of search that burns daylight and manpower had ended. Sheriff Holloway told Maya privately what he believed. Evan had likely died on the mountain exposure, fall, or both, and the body might never be recovered. He said it gently, but with the blunt honesty of someone who'd seen this pattern. Maya listened, then asked a question that startled him. "Do you have a spotting scope I can borrow?" Holloway hesitated, then agreed. She set it up on a ridge with a view of the north face and spent hours scanning the wall. Ledge by ledge, seam by seam, marking sections in a notebook like a cartographer mapping grief. And during one of those long, silent days, a new idea took root, one that felt less like hope and more like strategy. A drone. She'd read about search teams using aerial cameras in other states, small aircraft that could see what humans could not. When she mentioned it, Holloway admitted the department didn't have a budget for that kind of equipment, but he didn't shut her down. "If you can find someone who knows how to fly one up there," he told her, "we'll support it." Maya started asking everywhere. Local forums, outdoor groups, tech meetups, anyone with aviation experience. Most people offered sympathy and nothing else. A few replied politely but declined. Then, in early June, she received a message from Caleb Rios, a freelance videographer out of Denver. He specialized in rugged outdoor filming and had a drone built to handle wind and cold. He didn't ask for payment. He asked for coordinates. The drone. On June 19, 2017, Caleb drove to Stonehaven with his equipment. Maya met him at the trailhead before sunrise. The air was cool and almost still, the mountain faintly veiled by mist like breath. Caleb was in his early 30s, quiet, methodical, someone who treated machines with respect and fearlessness in equal measure. He asked Maya to walk him through Evan's planned line. She pointed to the route on the map, tracing the north face with a finger that trembled only slightly. Caleb studied the wall, then said he'd work in a grid, low to high, left to right, documenting everything. If Evan was visible anywhere, a camera would find him. They began shortly after 7. Caleb assembled the drone on a flat rock near the trail. It was larger than Maya expected, with 4 rotors and a stabilized camera mount that could tilt and pan with precision. He explained the limitation. Battery life, 20 to 25 minutes per flight in these conditions, less if wind increased. He launched. The drone lifted with a high, insect-like whine and climbed above the treetops. On Caleb's screen, the mountain filled the frame in sharp detail. Seams, cracks, ice patches, shadow pockets that could hide a person like a secret. The first flight revealed nothing. The second, nothing. Caleb landed, swapped batteries, and sent it higher. He focused on a prominent ledge system cutting diagonally across part of the face, one of the features that matched Evan's route plan. The drone hovered close to rock, camera angled down. Maya watched over Caleb's shoulder, barely breathing. Still nothing. Just stone, ice, and the cruel sameness of a cliff. By noon, they had covered roughly half the wall. Caleb reviewed footage on a laptop, scrolling frame by frame. Maya sat beside him on a boulder, holding coffee that had long gone cold, feeling as if time had become a physical weight pressing on her shoulders. Then Caleb stopped. He zoomed in on an area near the upper third of the face, where 2 rock features formed a shadowed corner. The darkness looked deeper than the rest, almost shaped. He replayed the clip, adjusted contrast, leaned closer. "It might be nothing," he murmured, "but I want another angle." After a short break, Caleb launched again, straight toward the flagged spot. The wind had risen slightly. The drone wobbled as it climbed, but Caleb steadied it with practiced hands. He eased it closer, tilting the camera downward. At first, the image looked grainy, the sun behind the wall washing detail away. Then the shadows resolved into shapes. Maya saw it before Caleb spoke. A ledge narrow, uneven jutting from the mountain about 800 feet above the base, and on it, a person. Small on the screen, but unmistakable, seated upright, back against rock, legs bent, one arm across the lap, clothing torn and faded until it nearly matched the color of stone. No movement. Caleb inched the drone closer, carefully, as if approaching a sleeping animal that could be startled awake. The camera refocused, and the details sharpened. Matted dark hair, a slack posture, a harness still buckled around the waist, a sling clipped into a bolt, rope trailing off the ledge, then ending broken or severed below. Maya made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a breath. She covered her mouth and turned away, eyes squeezed shut, as if denial could protect her from pixels. Caleb kept recording. He didn't need to say the name. The mountain already had. He circled the drone slowly, documenting angles, the ledge's approximate size, the exposure, the surrounding rock. There was no easy route up to it without technical climbing, no safe way down without rope. It was a trap carved into the wall. When Caleb landed, he shut the controller off and set it on the rock, like it had become too heavy to hold. He crouched near Maya and said quietly, "I'm so sorry." Then he called the sheriff. Confirmation and Planning Sheriff Holloway arrived within an hour, with 2 deputies and an experienced rescue climber named Owen Markham, who had participated in the initial searches. Caleb played the footage on his laptop, pausing and zooming where needed. Holloway watched without blinking, jaw clenched. When the video ended, he asked for the exact location. Caleb pulled up GPS overlay data and showed coordinates. The ledge was on the northeast section of the face, about 2/3 up, partially hidden from ground view by an overhang, the kind of place that could be missed by binocular searches and even by climbers scanning from below. Holloway turned to Owen. "Can you reach it?" Owen studied the rock around the ledge as if it were a puzzle. "Yes," he said. "But it's not going to be simple. We'll need a technical team. Either climb from below or rappel from above. Conditions have to cooperate." "How long to organize?" Holloway asked. 2 days, if I can call the right people." "Do it." Holloway looked at Maya. Her face was pale, as if grief had drained color from her skin. He asked if there was someone he could call for her. She said no. He promised they would bring Evan down. It might take time, but they would do it. Maya whispered, "Thank you," so softly the wind almost swallowed the words. Recovery. The recovery operation began on June 22, 2017. A team of 6 volunteer rescue climbers assembled at the base of Mount Argent at sunrise. They carried ropes, anchors, pulleys, a rescue litter designed for vertical terrain, and enough gear to build a complex hauling system on the wall. The lead climber, Marcus Vale, had spent over 20 years in mountain rescue. He'd worked recoveries in worse weather, on steeper walls, with heavier loads. But he knew this operation carried a different weight. The knowledge that they were retrieving someone who might have been alive when the first search was called off. They climbed carefully, placing protection, testing anchors, communicating through helmet radios. The rock was cold, damp in places, smelling faintly of mineral and dust. By midday, Marcus and a second climber, Sienna Cole, reached a stance about 50 feet above the ledge. They built a multi-point anchor system with redundancy, tested every piece, then prepared the ropes. Sienna would descend. She was lighter, had extensive experience with technical recoveries, and moved with controlled precision. Marcus would manage rope systems above, while the rest of the team positioned lower on the wall and at the base. Sienna clipped into the rappel line, checked her harness and helmet, then leaned over the edge and began to descend. As she dropped, the ledge came into view. Up close, the figure wasn't an image anymore. It was a man seated against stone, head tilted slightly to the side, eyes closed. His skin had darkened from wind and sun. His layers were shredded, jacket torn along one arm, pants ripped at knees and thighs. The harness was still fastened correctly. The rope, once his lifeline, hung below, ending in a frayed, discolored break. Sienna landed on the ledge and clipped into the bolt Evan had anchored months earlier. She tested it, then spoke into her radio, voice steady. "I'm at the site. Confirmed deceased." She assessed quickly. No obvious catastrophic trauma. No blood. No major fractures apparent from visual inspection. The body position suggested he had sat down deliberately, perhaps to rest, perhaps because he knew he could not move safely. Then she began the grim work of preparation. She treated him with the care reserved for the living, unfastening gear, securing him into the rescue litter, wrapping him in a thermal blanket not for warmth, but for dignity. She noticed small details that made the scene feel unbearably human. Scraped hands, fingers curled slightly, as if still gripping an invisible rope. Boots still laced, though one sole had partially separated. There was a small action camera clipped to his chest harness. The lens was cracked, but the housing intact. Sienna removed it carefully and stowed it in a secured pouch. When the litter was ready, she radioed Marcus. The team began the haul. It took hours. The litter had to be moved around overhangs and across rough stone. Sienna climbed alongside, guiding it with a tagline so it wouldn't spin or slam into the wall. The rest of the team managed systems, with slow, deliberate coordination, the kind of work where impatience is lethal. Maya was not there. Sheriff Holloway had suggested she stay in town, and for once she had accepted. She didn't need to see Evan's body on a rope. She only needed to know he was coming down. Late afternoon, the litter reached the top of the technical section. From there, the team transitioned to lower-angle terrain, moving him hand to hand until they reached the base. At the trailhead, Sheriff Holloway met them with a county medical examiner's transport vehicle waiting. Evan was placed into a black recovery bag, zipped, and loaded into the back. Holloway shook the team members' hands one by one, thanking them quietly. Marcus told him, "No one should stay on that wall forever." Holloway asked about the camera. Sienna handed it over. He sealed it carefully in an evidence bag. "We'll see what it holds," he said. "Maya will know first." Telling Maya back in Stonehaven, word spread before the transport vehicle even reached town. People stood outside storefronts and cafes, silent as the vehicle passed. In small communities, grief doesn't stay private. It becomes part of the street. Maya waited at the sheriff's office. Holloway brought her into a private room and closed the door. He told her Evan had been found on a ledge high on the north face, and that initial assessment suggested he died from exposure rather than violent injury. The recovery had succeeded. Evan was being taken to the county examiner. Maya asked if she could see him. "Not yet," Holloway said gently. "Let the examiner do what needs to be done first." She nodded, eyes red but dry. Some people run out of tears before they run out of pain. Holloway handed her a small bag of personal effects recovered from the ledge, a carabiner, a water-damaged notebook with pages stuck together, and the camera still in its protective casing. Maya turned the camera in her hands like it might burn. "Is there anything on it?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Holloway said, "but we'll find out." That night, she returned to her rented room and sat on the bed, staring at the camera for a long time. Whatever it contained, she wasn't sure she could bear it. But she knew she would, eventually. The examination. The county medical examiner's office sat outside Ridgefield, a modest building of brick and concrete that looked like it belonged to paperwork rather than tragedy. On the morning of June 23, 2017, the forensic pathologist, Dr. Samuel Klein, began his examination. He had nearly 30 years of experience and had seen wilderness deaths before. They all carried a particular gravity, not because they were mysterious, but because they were so often lonely. Dr. Klein documented methodically photographs, clothing removal, labeling, measurements. Evan's jacket, once a bright, visibility-focused color, had faded to a dull rust tone. The fabric had stiffened from dried sweat and dirt. Sleeves were shredded by abrasion against rock. Pants were torn in multiple places. The harness, though weathered, remained intact and properly fitted. That mattered. It suggested equipment failure wasn't a matter of careless setup. Beneath the clothing, the body showed signs consistent with prolonged exposure in cold, dry conditions. Darkened, leathery skin on face, and hands mummification, a natural process in certain environments. There were no signs of major trauma, no skull fractures, no deep lacerations, no obvious broken bones. Hands showed heavy abrasion consistent with rope and rock handling. Legs exhibited muscle wasting, suggesting limited movement. For a period before death immobilization, weakness, or both. Dr. Klein collected samples for toxicology and analysis, though he suspected this wasn't a case that would reveal surprises. The overall impression was of a slow shutdown, cold, dehydration, exhaustion. In his preliminary report, he listed the cause of death as hypothermia, compounded by dehydration, with possible contribution from altitude illness. He estimated Evan may have survived for days after becoming stranded. Then came the question that refused to stay quiet. How did he end up on that ledge, and why couldn't he get off it? The camera might answer that. The camera Sheriff Holloway sent the device to a digital forensics specialist in Denver, Noah Merritt, who worked with law enforcement on damaged electronics. Noah had recovered data from devices pulled out of rivers and pulled from burned houses. A cracked climbing camera didn't intimidate him. After 2 days of careful work, he accessed partial files. Some were corrupted, some incomplete. Timestamps could be unreliable because internal clocks fail when batteries die or circuits are damaged, but enough survived to build a sequence. Holloway reviewed the files alone in his office, blinds drawn. What he saw was a record of a climb that began with control and ended with a man narrating his own disappearance. The first images showed the mountain from below. Wide shots of the north face under clear sky, stone and ice towering like a cathedral wall. In one photo, Evan's shadow stretched across snow-long, dark, distorted by the low sun. Then came progress images, hands on holds, boots wedged into cracks, Evan's face partially visible behind sunglasses and a helmet. The camera had been set to capture at intervals, a common solo practice. At first, everything looked strong and deliberate. As the sequence climbed higher, the ground dropped away. Trees shrank into dark clusters. In a still frame at a ledge system, Evan paused to eat an energy bar half unwrapped in one photo, a panoramic shot of ridges and valleys in another. The timestamps suggested he was moving efficiently. Then the tone changed. Higher on the wall, the rock looked steeper and ice more dominant. In a short clip, Evan's breathing was louder, and his voice, usually calm, muttered about the stone being less solid than expected. A gear placement, a hard test tug, a pause. Then the image that made Holloway's stomach tighten. A frame angled slightly downward showed Evan's feet balanced on a narrow shelf. Rope ran from his harness, trailing down out of view. Behind him, the rock surface showed a thin fracture line. Subtle, but there. According to the camera, this was late afternoon on March 14, 2017. The next clip gave the situation context. The camera pointed outward from Evan's chest harness. Wind hammered the microphone. His breathing was quick, controlled, but strained. Okay, he said. A pause. The anchor pulled. It just came out. I'm on a ledge. I'm safe for the moment, but the rope is cut. I can see it hanging down there. Must have caught an edge when it failed. Wind noise surged. I've got maybe 60 feet left on this end. Not enough to rappel. Not enough to reach the next point below. I've got to think. The clip ended. Photos followed. The ledge, a thin shelf with a vertical wall behind, and empty air in front. The severed rope, frayed and fluttering. The rock above, smooth and blank, no obvious line. In another short clip, his voice steadied into that careful tone climbers use when they're trying to keep fear from becoming panic. It's getting dark. I'm staying here tonight. I've got my bivy sack, some food, water. Weather's holding. I just need to stay calm. The next morning, March 15th, the light looked paler, the sky overcast. Images showed Evan's hands, red, swollen, fingers stiff, his water bottle half empty, the drop below, dizzying. His voice in a clip from that day was different. Less confident, more factual, like someone reporting damage. I tried going up, he said. No good. Too blank without more gear. Tried down. But I can't reach anything with what I've got left. He paused. I sent a distress on the messenger. Don't know if it went through. Battery's low. I'm going to conserve it. Wind screamed over the mic. If anyone finds this, tell Maya I'm sorry. I thought I could handle it. After that, the footage became sporadic, as if he was rationing power. On March 16th, he described trying to signal with a mirror, hoping sunlight might catch someone's eye far below. He shouted until his voice failed, though he admitted he knew the chances were small. He attempted to improvise with remaining rope and gear, but the length wasn't enough. On March 17th, his language shifted from escape to endurance. "It's brutal at night," he said. "I'm trying to keep circulation. I've got maybe a couple days of food left if I stretch it. Water's worse. Melting snow takes forever, and there isn't much." He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. "I keep thinking I'll see people down there, but it's just trees and rocks. Maybe they're searching somewhere else. Maybe they think I topped out." His voice trailed off. The final still image was dated March 19th. Evan's face gaunt, burned by sun and wind, eyes hollow. He wasn't looking at the camera, he was looking outward. Then, one last clip dated March 21st. His voice was a whisper, rough and thin. "I don't think I'm getting out," he said. "I tried. I really tried. I'm so tired." A long stretch of wind and shallow breathing. "Maya, I love you. I'm sorry." The screen went black. No more files. Sheriff Holloway sat in silence after the last clip ended, feeling the cruel clarity of it. Evan hadn't died quickly. He'd lived on that ledge, aware, waiting for help that never found the right piece of rock in time. Holloway made copies for evidence, wrote a detailed summary, and prepared himself for the hardest part. Showing Maya. Watching the truth. Maya came to the sheriff's office the next day. Holloway warned her the footage was difficult, that she did not have to watch it. She looked at him with a steadiness that surprised even her. "I need to know," she said. He played the files in order. Maya watched without moving, hands folded tightly, face turned into a mask of focus. When Evan's voice came through the speakers, her breath caught, but she didn't look away. She watched every clip until the final blackout. When it ended, she sat very still. Holloway asked quietly if she was okay. Maya nodded once. "I'm glad he could speak," she said, voice thin. "I'm glad he wasn't erased." It wasn't closure, but it was understanding, the only kind the mountains sometimes allow. Funeral Evan's memorial was held on a warm afternoon in early July near Fort Collins, in a small chapel built of pale wood and glass, with large windows facing the foothills. The view felt intentional, open, mountain-facing, like a last gesture in the language Evan loved. More than 100 people came. Climbers, friends, family, co-workers from the outdoor gear company where he'd worked part-time, and people who knew him only as the quiet guy who always checked your knot. Maya sat in the front row beside Evan's parents, Harold and Marianne Mercer, both in their late 60s. Harold was a retired engineer who never fully understood why anyone would choose danger for joy, but he had never tried to cage his son. Marianne had always worried. Now her fear had become reality. A longtime climbing friend, Elliot Crane, spoke about Evan's meticulous preparation and calm competence. He described Evan as someone who didn't climb to conquer anything, but to find a kind of stillness he couldn't find elsewhere. Others shared memories. His patience when partners panicked, his dry humor when conditions turned ugly, his habit of fixing other people's gear without charging. Maya did not speak. She couldn't trust her voice to carry what her heart held. Instead, she prepared a slideshow photos of Evan laughing at camp, staring into sunrise, braced against wind on ridgelines. There were no images from the ledge footage. Those belonged only to her. After the service, people gathered under cottonwoods. Maya stood apart, watching the foothills in the distance. Sheriff Holloway attended quietly. He offered condolences again, then told her something he'd been thinking since the camera review. "From what I've seen," he said, "he didn't make a reckless mistake. He got trapped by a failure he couldn't predict." Maya listened, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I understand," she said, "but understanding doesn't bring him home." Holloway nodded, because there was nothing to argue with. What remains? In the weeks after, Maya tried to return to work graphic design, remote contracts, familiar routines, but the apartment felt haunted by ordinary objects. Evan's mug, his half-repaired gloves, books marked with notes. She couldn't bring herself to move most of it. At night, she rewatched the camera files, not out of morbid curiosity, but because they were a final conversation. A record of Evan still being Evan, thinking, planning, trying, speaking her name. In late July, she found a short clip she hadn't noticed before, buried in corrupted fragments, about 15 seconds long. The image shook as if handheld. Sky, then rock, then Evan's legs stretched out along the ledge. His voice was faint. "I saw a bird today," he rasped. "An eagle, I think. It flew right by, close enough I could hear the wings. Didn't even look at me." A pause. Made me think. Maybe disappearing is like that. You're still here, but the world moves around you like you're already gone. The clip ended. Maya replayed it again and again, chilled by the quiet insight. If not for the drone, Evan might have remained up there, unseen, unrecovered, until time made him part of the wall. The thought made her feel cold, even in summer. In August, she made a decision. She couldn't stay surrounded by Evan's absence. She gave notice, packed what she could, and donated most of his climbing gear to a non-profit that outfitted young climbers who couldn't afford equipment. She kept only a few things: his favorite jacket, a travel journal from South America, and a camera. Before leaving Colorado, she drove back to Stonehaven one last time. It was a clear morning in late August, aspens beginning to yellow. She parked at the trailhead and hiked to the rocky spot where Caleb had launched the drone. The north face loomed the same, massive, indifferent. She stood for a long time looking up, searching for the ledge. She couldn't see it from the ground. The wall hid it in angles and shadows, but she knew it existed, a narrow shelf where Evan had waited, spoken, watched the valley as days passed. She whispered his name into the wind, a sound too small for the mountain to care about. Then she turned and walked back down. By the time she reached her car, the parking lot was filling with hikers, laughing, adjusting packs, beginning their own journeys into the wilderness. Maya didn't resent them. She just hoped they would be luckier than Evan had been. She drove south toward a new life she couldn't yet picture, carrying Evan's memory not as a chain, but as a chapter that would never be erased. The echo in the climbing world. Evan's death traveled quietly through the climbing community. It became a story shared in gear shops, mentioned in safety courses, discussed in the blunt way climbers discuss risk. Not to scare newcomers away, but to remind them what the margin truly is. The ledge footage was never released publicly. Out of respect, it stayed within the investigation and within Maya's possession. But the details spread. A failed anchor, a severed rope, a terrain trap on a north face, where weather could stall rescue long enough for time to become lethal. A small memorial plaque appeared at the trailhead, placed by rescue volunteers. A simple bronze plate on a stone cairn. Evan Mercer. He climbed with courage and care. People stopped to read it. Some touched it lightly with fingertips, as if acknowledging a truth they didn't want to say aloud. Sheriff Holloway retired the following spring. At his retirement gathering, someone mentioned Evan's case as one of the hardest the county had faced, not for paperwork, but for the feeling that help had been close and still too far. Holloway didn't say much. He'd learned that some cases live in you, not because of what you did, but because of what you couldn't change. Caleb Rios kept filming in the mountains. He rarely spoke about the operation, but he carried the memory of that image. The figure on the ledge, like a bruise behind his eyes. It reminded him that technology can reveal what humans miss, but it can't turn back time. It can only witness. Marcus Vale and Sienna Cole continued rescue work. They emphasized 3 lessons whenever Evan's story came up: redundancy, communication backups, and humility in terrain that offers no compromise. The mountain, they said, doesn't negotiate. A fund, a film, and a shift in practice. Later in 2017, climbers who'd known Evan organized a fundraiser in his memory. The goal wasn't to romanticize what happened, but to build something useful from loss. A grant program to help young climbers access training in mountain safety, rescue systems, and wilderness medicine. They called it the Evan Mercer Memorial Training Fund. Within 6 months, donations from individuals, climbing gyms, and outdoor companies pushed the total past $40,000. The first grants went to 3 recipients: a student studying wilderness medicine, a guide trainee pursuing technical rescue certification, and a young woman aiming to complete avalanche safety education. Each recipient received a card with Evan's photo and a quote pulled from an old blog post of his. "The mountain doesn't care who you are. It only cares whether you're paying attention." In 2019, a filmmaker named Sofia Navarro arrived in Stonehaven to interview people about the growing use of drones in wilderness rescue. Evan's case had become a turning point example, not because drones caused anything, but because a drone finally made the invisible visible. Holloway, now retired, agreed to speak on camera after long hesitation. He described the search, the pause due to weather, the moment the drone footage revealed a truth that ground teams couldn't see. When asked whether Evan might have been saved if drones had been deployed earlier, Holloway paused for a long time. "Based on what we saw," he said, "there might have been a window, but we didn't know where to look. We made the best calls we could with what we had." Sofia's documentary released in early 2019 sparked debate. Some climbers felt it emphasized technology at the expense of personal responsibility. Others argued it showcased a tool that could prevent future tragedies. What mattered most was that the conversation didn't end. In the years after, more search and rescue groups across the country incorporated drones into standard practice. Training protocols improved. Flight capabilities expanded. Drones helped locate lost hikers, scan avalanche debris, and assess dangerous terrain before sending people in. Lives were saved. And quietly, Evan's story sat behind those changes, like a shadow. A reminder that unreachable isn't always true, just sometimes unseen. Later years, when the COVID-19 pandemic arrived in 2020, the outdoors became a refuge for people desperate for space and air. Trails around towns like Stonehaven saw crowds unlike anything locals remembered. Many visitors were inexperienced, pushing beyond their comfort without understanding how quickly conditions can turn. The sheriff's office, now led by Sheriff Dana Reese, handled more calls than usual. Lost hikers, ankle injuries, people caught in storms without layers or lights. In that strange period, donations to the Mercer Training Fund rose again. People who had never climbed suddenly understood that nature isn't a theme park. It doesn't offer refunds. Maya, living in northern New Mexico by then, watched the shift from a distance. She built a quieter life, freelance design work, pottery, friends who knew her history, but didn't reduce her to it. She didn't return to climbing, but she did hike long desert walks under wide skies, where the horizon didn't feel like a wall. In the fall of 2020, Evan's parents wrote to her. They wanted to donate part of Evan's life insurance payout to the fund and asked how she thought it should be used. Maya suggested a scholarship aimed at climbers from underrepresented communities people who might not otherwise afford training or gear. They agreed. By 2021, the scholarship supported multiple recipients, each writing thank you letters that Maya kept in a folder on her desk. On hard days, she reread them to remind herself that something constructive had grown out of the loss. That summer, she received an unexpected email from a young climber named Ethan Rowe. He wrote that he'd read about Evan's incident and that it changed how he approached risk. He thanked her, strangely, gently, for keeping Evan's story alive in the ways it had been shared. Maya read the email several times, surprised by how much it affected her. She replied simply, "Climb smart, trust your instincts, and never confuse confidence with immunity." She did not mention the camera files. Those remained hers. Evan's last words preserved in digital fragments, a private testimony that the mountain hadn't been able to erase. Mount Argent still stands. The ledge still exists, hidden from the valley unless you know exactly where to look, or unless you're seeing through a lens high enough to catch the angle. The stone doesn't remember names. The wind doesn't carry voices the way people wish it would. The mountain just endures. But people remember. And somewhere beneath wide New Mexico skies, Maya carries Evan's memory the way you carry a smooth stone in your pocket. Not because it's heavy, but because it's real. Something you can touch when you need proof that love existed and that it mattered. The reason Evan Mercer's case stayed in people's minds wasn't only because of the drone image. It was because the image felt like an accusation, an answer that arrived too late, and only after months of searching the wrong angles. Sheriff Grant Holloway knew how easily people rewrote history after tragedy. They said things like, "They should have looked higher. They should have used aerial search sooner. They should have assumed he was stuck on the face." But should wasn't a tool you could put in a pack. It didn't keep anyone warm. It didn't anchor ropes or fly in wind. It only showed up after outcomes were irreversible. Still, Holloway couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain had been hiding Evan in plain sight. Not buried, not lost in a crevasse, not scattered across a scree field, just sitting on a ledge that was visible if you were standing in the one place the human body couldn't stand. The mountain's geometry, Mount Argent's north face, wasn't a single plane of rock. It was a complex architecture. Ribs, overhangs, shallow corners, ice runnels, and small discontinuities that created pockets of invisibility. From the valley, binoculars made the wall look like a uniform grid, as if careful scanning could guarantee results. In reality, the wall was full of blind spots. Even a minor bulge could conceal an entire ledge, especially one tucked into a recess where shadow deepened and the sun hit at a harsh angle. During the first search phase in March, the rescue teams had worked with what they knew. Evan's intended route looked straightforward on paper. An approach to base camp, then the technical lineup through a series of weaknesses in the stone. If Evan ran into trouble, the most likely outcomes were also the most common. A fall into gullies, a slip into an unseen chute, a slide into snow that would cover tracks within hours. The idea that he could be alive, immobile, and stuck on a ledge wasn't impossible, but it wasn't the first assumption. Terrain like that didn't often hold people. It tended to release them violently. Now the drone footage showed a different kind of danger, the kind that doesn't kill quickly, the kind that traps. The quiet debate. In the days after the recovery, the sheriff's office received calls from journalists, climbing blogs, and even a few outdoor magazines. Most asked the same questions in different words. Why did the original search fail to locate him? Was the operation suspended too early? Did Evan's solo decision make rescue impossible? Would a drone have saved him if deployed sooner? Holloway refused to turn grief into spectacle. He gave a short statement, careful, factual, and then stopped taking most media inquiries. He was not interested in a public autopsy of everyone's best intentions. But inside the county system, the questions didn't vanish. They moved into private meetings and closed-door reviews. The search and rescue coordinator compiled a timeline, reported missing, trailhead confirmed, base evidence located, conditions worsened, suspension, resumed attempts, no new results, eventual closure. It was all reasonable on paper. Yet the footage complicated the story. If Evan's camera timestamps were even roughly accurate, he had remained alive for several days after becoming stranded. That fact alone sharpened every what if into something with edges. Holloway sat with Owen Markham, the rescue climber, who'd assessed the ledge access one evening in late June, after paperwork and phone calls had finally slowed. Owen had the kind of calm that came from long exposure to risk. He didn't romanticize or catastrophize. He spoke in probabilities and physics. If we'd known he was there, Owen said, the question becomes, could we reach him fast enough? Holloway didn't answer right away. Owen continued. Even with coordinates, the climb to that ledge wasn't trivial. You saw the anchor zone. It's steep, it's cold, and the conditions are unstable in March. We could have lost rescuers. That's not just bureaucracy talking. That's reality. I know, Holloway said, but he was alive. Owen nodded once. Maybe. Likely, yes, but in a storm window, alive doesn't always mean savable. It means not dead yet. That's different, and it's brutal, but it matters. Holloway stared into his coffee like it might give him absolution. It didn't. What the camera suggested. When the digital files were cataloged, one detail stood out beyond the emotional impact. Evan's description of the anchor failure and severed rope. He didn't say his harness failed. He didn't say his knot slipped. He didn't say he made a careless move. He said the anchor pulled and the rope cut on an edge. That combination anchor loss plus rope severing was rare, but not unheard of. It suggested a specific chain reaction. Evan waited an anchor point. The anchor failed. Bolt pull, gear placement failure, rock break, corrosion, or hidden fracture. The rope, suddenly under dynamic load, whipped across rock. The rope contacted a sharp edge and severed under tension, a single failure becoming a compound catastrophe. Mountain rescue professionals called that kind of sequence stacked bad luck. Not because it was magical, but because it was a convergence of low-probability events that produced a high-consequence outcome. And once the rope was cut, the wall turned into a mathematical problem with a deadly answer. From Evan's ledge, he couldn't rappel. Not enough rope to reach safe terrain. He couldn't down-climb, not safely, not with cold, stiff hands and minimal protection. And the rock above was too blank for an unroped push. The ledge wasn't just a resting spot. It was a cul-de-sac in vertical space. Maya's choice people expected Maya to become a symbol. The grieving partner who either broke publicly or turned into a crusader for safety. The kind of story that fits neatly into documentaries and articles. Maya resisted both roles. Grief didn't make her dramatic. It made her precise. She reviewed Evan's last clips again, not for repeated pain, but because her mind demanded coherence. She needed to understand how a careful person could end up in a place where caution stopped mattering. At night, she wrote in a notebook, a different one than the water-damaged pages pulled from the ledge. Her notes were less like a diary and more like an investigation. Day 1, approach likely successful, base camp confirmed. Day 2, start of climb. Anchor failure, late afternoon. Stuck, at least 6-8 days alive. Signal attempts, mirror, shouting. Messenger, attempted, uncertain transmission. She circled one line again and again. Battery low. Conserve it. It haunted her, that small, practical decision, because it revealed Evan was still thinking like a climber, still planning, still managing resources, not panicking, not surrendering immediately, just enduring. In early July, after the memorial, friends tried to pull her toward normal life. They invited her to dinners, movie nights, climbing gym gatherings, anything that resembled routine. She went to a few. She smiled at the right times. She answered questions gently. But inside, she had begun to feel something new. A hard clarity that the only way to survive the memory was to stop orbiting it. Colorado was filled with Evan. Not just his gear, his friends, his roots, but the entire mountain worldview that now felt like a doorway to a place she could never enter again without resentment. So when she left for northern New Mexico later that summer, it wasn't an escape from love. It was a move toward a life where love wouldn't be constantly sharpened into loss by familiar streets and familiar peaks. She didn't take much, but she took the camera. Not because she wanted to watch it forever, because she couldn't bear the idea that Evan's final record might someday be misplaced, corrupted, deleted, or treated as content. To Maya, it wasn't content. It was a voice. The quiet aftermath in Stonehaven. Stonehaven returned to its rhythm. Summer hikers filled the cafes. Weekend climbers passed through the lodge. The sheriff's office handled the usual calls: vehicle accidents, domestic disputes, petty theft, the small human dramas that continued even under enormous mountains. But Evan's case left a subtle change. At the ranger station, there was new emphasis on route plans, not just where climbers intended to go, but how they intended to communicate and what redundancy they carried. There were new posters about drone-assisted rescue and the importance of backup location devices. And among local rescue volunteers, the case became a reference point. Not a lecture, not a scolding, a reminder. In training sessions that fall, Marcus Vale, lead climber on the recovery, started, including a short scenario discussion. He didn't use Evan's name at first. He didn't need to. He described a climber stranded on a ledge with a severed rope and limited supplies, alive for days, unseen from below. "What do you do?" Marcus asked. Rescuers offered answers, some practical, some idealistic. Then Marcus would point out the central problem: visibility. You can't rescue what you can't locate, and the mountain is an expert at hiding. Ground teams did a lot right, he told them, but the mountain geometry beat binoculars. If you want a better chance next time, you plan for aerial observation early, if you can do it safely. He always added the same line at the end: and remember, we never trade a life for a recovery. Because it was true, and because it hurt. By late summer, the official paperwork had caught up with the grief. Sheriff Grant Holloway closed the case the way he closed all wilderness fatalities, with facts, timelines, and a quiet admission that mountains don't offer clean endings. The final report listed Evan Mercer's last known movements, the likely sequence of failure, and the reason the first searches had missed him: geometry, shadow, and the simple truth that the cliff hid its own ledge from human eyes on the ground. On September 2, 2017, Holloway convened a small after-action review in Stonehaven. It wasn't a public hearing, and it wasn't a performance. It was a room with coffee, maps, and tired people who'd carried ropes up cold rock and carried answers back down. Owen Markham attended. Marcus Vale joined by phone. The ranger supervisor brought weather logs and search notes. Caleb Rios provided the drone flight path data. They discussed what went right: rapid trailhead confirmation, base camp verification, a responsible suspension when conditions became too dangerous, and a recovery plan that avoided risking rescuers. They also discussed what went wrong without assigning blame: early assumptions about likely fall zones, limited aerial capability, and how quickly visibility can collapse when a wall is not a flat surface, but an architecture of concealment. The most uncomfortable part was the same question everyone wanted to ask, and no one could answer with certainty. If they'd flown a drone during the first week before the storm system moved in, could Evan have been found alive? Marcus was blunt. "If we'd had coordinates within 48 hours, he said, voice crackling through the speaker. "There's a chance, not a guarantee, a chance. But we didn't have the tool and we didn't have the expectation. We had a missing climber on a huge face with a dozen plausible outcomes." Holloway wrote one line on his notepad and underlined it twice. Visibility is survival, not because it sounded poetic, but because it was painfully practical. A person can endure cold. A person can endure hunger. A person can even endure fear. But no one endures being unseen. 2 weeks later, Holloway drove out to the trailhead on a quiet morning and stood in front of the small bronze plaque the rescue volunteers had placed. He read Evan's name again, then looked up at the north face. From the valley, it still appeared seamless stone stitched to ice, shadows deep enough to swallow color. He could not locate the ledge by sight, even knowing it existed. That was the part that stayed with him. The knowledge that the answer had been there the entire time, hidden not by distance, but by angle. As fall turned the aspens gold, Stonehaven started preparing for winter again. The lodge filled with hunters and late-season hikers. The cafe switched to thicker soups. The mountain weather tightened into ice. Maya Collins didn't return. She had already left for northern New Mexico, trading high peaks for wide skies and open land. The new town wasn't a place climbers bragged about. It was a place people watched sunsets, made pottery, and didn't ask you to explain your sadness like it was a riddle. She worked freelance, kept her days simple, and learned how to measure healing by small things. Sleeping through the night, laughing at a friend's joke without guilt, walking without scanning every ridgeline, as if looking for a human figure. Some evenings, she opened the camera files again, but less and less. Not because she had forgotten Evan, she hadn't, but because she was learning that grief doesn't require constant rehearsal to be real. The videos were a final conversation, and she didn't need to replay the last sentence to remember what was said. In early 2018, Evan's parents reached out. They wanted to do something in his name that wasn't just a memorial and wasn't just a warning story. They asked Maya what she thought Evan would have valued. Maya answered with one word: training. Evan had always respected the technical side of survival redundant systems, rescue knowledge, medical readiness. If something good could come from loss, it would be competence shared forward, the kind that turns a bad day into a recoverable problem. So the Evan Mercer Memorial Training Fund became real. It started small donations from friends, a few local gyms, an outdoor shop that hosted a fundraiser night. Within a year, it was helping pay for wilderness medicine courses, rope rescue certification, and avalanche education. It didn't pretend to erase risk. It simply improved the odds. Caleb Rios, the drone pilot, did not seek attention for what he'd found. Still, he began volunteering his time to search and rescue groups that wanted to build drone capability. He taught basics: how wind behaves near cliff faces, how battery drain accelerates in cold, how to grid a mountain like a map, how to record usable footage instead of pretty shots. By 2019, drone deployment had become more common in the region, not as a miracle, but as a tool. Teams learned to treat aerial search the way they treated ropes or radios: valuable, limited, and dangerous if used carelessly. New protocols appeared. Checklists got longer. Training got better. Nothing about that progress felt triumphant to Holloway. It felt necessary. In the summer of June 20th, 2021, Maya returned to Colorado for the first time since she'd left. She didn't announce it. She didn't come to be a symbol. She came because 4 years of distance had shifted something inside her. The memory had stopped slicing and had started settling. She drove to Stonehaven early in the morning and parked at the familiar trailhead. The air smelled like pine and dust and sun-warmed rock. It was beautiful in the way the mountains always are. Beauty that does not apologize for what it can take. She walked to the plaque and traced Evan's name with one finger. The bronze was warm from the sun. For a moment, she expected that old urge, the desperate need to look up, to find the ledge, to force the cliff to reveal what it hid. But she didn't. Instead, she sat on a flat stone near the trail and listened. Wind moving through trees, a distant bird call, the small sounds of hikers preparing gear. A group of young climbers adjusted packs and laughed, unaware of how thin the margin can be. Maya watched them and felt something unexpected. Not bitterness, not fear, but a quiet tenderness. Evan had loved these places. He had loved the focus and the honesty of rock and ice. He had known the bargain and had taken it anyway. She could hate the mountains for what they did, but she could not hate them for being what they were. After an hour, she stood, took one last look at the north face, and spoke softly, not to the mountain, but to Evan. "I carried you," she said. "I'm still carrying you, but I'm living now." Then she turned and walked back to her car. As she drove away, the north face disappeared behind trees and bends in the road. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like release, something she had earned, not something she was forced into. The mountain remained, unchanged. The ledge remained, hidden. Stonehaven remained, serving coffee to travelers and watching storms roll in. But in Maya's life, the story finally shifted from waiting to remembering, and that made all the difference. Because some endings aren't a moment. They're a decision, made quietly, over and over, until the world stops orbiting what you lost and starts moving forward again.